All right, welcome everybody to live Q&A. This is Pastor on the Recovering Heretic. I am probably Pastor Dave.
And I am most assuredly Recovering Heretic,
I'm
Dan.
glad you're more confident than I am. How are you, Dan?
I am good.
Good.
I'm good. Feeling very heretical today. It's good.
Oh, there we go.
That always goes. We are...
Just remember, heresy is about what you teach, not what you believe.
Oh, darn it. Okay.
That's the difference.
Well, I am teaching after this, but
Right.
probably not heretically.
Probably not heretic.
We are continuing our look at what Holy Week was like.
Uh-huh.
This is like a marathon thing.
We got 7 weeks of Easter. We've still got one more.
That's right, so we can keep going on
Right.
this. That's
Still
perfect.
got one more week next week.
And a quick reminder, I did remember my laptop this week, but it is not working.
All right.
So maybe time for a new
Yes.
laptop.
The new Surface tablet.
So that being the case, if the crew, the team up top, just let us know if we get comments and shout them down. So starting with, taking over where we left off, at the Last Supper. We're now down to Thursday of Holy Week.
All right. We might get through
Yeah, we might
Friday.
actually make
Right.
But we'll see. So the Last Supper, lots of questions about that.
Yeah.
But one of the big things is, it does talk about Jesus blessing the bread and the wine.
Yep.
And I'm a little embarrassed to say, it's only been the last couple of years that I remembered, because I used to go to Passover Seders a lot with my Jewish friends. They would invite me over, and it was fun.
Yeah.
It's cool and enlightening. And I forgot that blessing of the bread and wine is a traditional part of the Seder.
Yeah. Right. It's not quite a Seder because the modern Seder hadn't quite fully developed yet, but it is the ancestor. It is the evolutionary ancestor of a Seder meal.
Yeah.
That is what they're doing.
So growing up, I thought that was a special thing that he did.
Yeah.
But it turns out that's just part of it. Why would they have discerned anything unusual in him beginning blessing of the bread and wine? Would they have said, whoa, wait, what's he doing there? Or would it have just been, okay, now this is the part?
Well, the words are different, right? He talks about my body and, blood of the new covenant, so it's kind of like if you get to Christmas worship and somebody's altered the lyrics of your favorite Christmas carol, you would notice that something was off, I would also say it's clear enough that it was important. It was remembered enough that 3 of 4 Gospels record it, plus Paul, all with the exact same or near exact same language, so it was clear enough
that they all remembered this, so this is a consistent thing.
Right. And John doesn't have a Last Supper, but he has this whole, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you will have no part in me discourse in chapter 6. So and it was distinctive enough that it was remembered in some way in all of the Gospels plus Paul, which is
So one of those that kind of would indicate this really, really, really happened pretty much this way.
Right, just because it stuck out.
Yeah.
It must have stuck out to them because they remember it very clearly.
And even in John, isn't John's kind of gross in that the actual terminology John used? It's not just eat, it's gnaw. You will gnaw on my body.
Right, on my flesh and drink my blood.
Yeah.
You will have no part in me. Yes.
So he's talking about himself the way we'd talk about a hunk of beef.
Yeah, basically, yes. So, right, so you get this. So anyway, in 3 Gospels plus Paul, you get the exact same language, and then John has his own distinctive discourse around it, but it was familiar enough that must have stuck out enough and been odd enough that they all clearly remembered it,
Well, the way those Gospels say it, it's almost like he lured them in. Because those Gospels do say he did it at the end. He blessed the bread and the wine, and then he said, this is my body.
Yeah,
how would that have impacted them? Why would he wait till the end of the blessing to add that part?
Well, your ending is the part you want people to remember, right? I mean, the whole and also, right, I mean, from there he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane and gets arrested and then crucified, right? You know, it's like, this is like the last, this is his, if you get nothing else from this ministry, please get this kind of moment for him. You know, like, get this, please, you know.
Wouldn't, and especially given the terminology that John used, you know, that John's making it clear this is not a metaphor. He means it really is his body and blood.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that have grossed out potential converts early on?
It did.
Like,
I mean, it's
so
right
Christians
there.
had the reputation of being cannibals?
Well, I mean, it's right there in chapter 6 of John. It's right there in the rest of the chapter. You know, the chapter ends on all of the people following him going, this is a hard saying, who can believe it? And they all leave except for the 12 apostles. And that's actually where we get our gospel acclamation, because Jesus looks at the disciples and go, are you going to leave too? And then Peter says, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. You know, but that's actually the context of those words is literally everybody got up and left except the 12 apostles, because he kept saying this gnaw on my flesh business.
Yeah.
You know, so
that's one of the major things that would be different then versus, because today we just take it for granted, you know, oh yeah, the body and blood of Christ, blah, blah, blah.
I mean, in a certain way we take it for granted, but I think we're better about it than, you know, when other time do people kneel, right, in our world? Can you think of the last time you actually knelt?
Yeah, well, I'm not a good example, because I like to be on the floor, so I kneel a lot.
Well,
but I mean, like when you swear fealty to a...
Right, when was the last time you swore fealty, right? Yeah. Like, we're not in Britain here.
So, it was like 500 years ago.
Right, you know, so can you think of the last time, like, in your everyday life, you knelt at a communion rail the way you kneel at the communion rail, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, probably never, you know, other than communion. You know, we do it every Sunday, so maybe it's oddness, but, you know, we actually, despite the fact that we do it every Sunday, we treat it differently than we do almost anything else in life, which is true. We should, you know, it's Jesus, but, you know.
Yeah. Well, this is a side note from the Holy Week stuff, but that gets me thinking about genuflecting, right? And we still genuflect in the Latin Rite Church.
Right. And I genuflect, you know, at the elements.
Yeah. So why is it just a show of respect?
Yeah, I mean, if it really is Jesus, right, your Lord and Savior is ta-da right there, you know, like that would be the logical response.
So it's like feudal fealty again.
Well, more older than feudal, just, you know, here's, you know, me acknowledging here is my God, right? You know, I guess it's also a reminder to me, I had a professor in seminary who'd like to say, the basic mistake we make as Western Protestants usually, he used to say, is that we like to think of ourselves as brains on sticks. You know, that like it's all head, your body doesn't matter, you know, and it's all in your mind, you know, it's all intellectual. And so the genuflecting is this kind of continual reminder of like, no, I don't just worship with my head, you know, I worship with my body, you know. This is why I would get thrown out of the church, but this is why incense is important. You know, it's the same reminder, right? You don't just worship with your head, you worship with all your senses, including your sense of smell.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to lose. I would never win that battle here, but, you know, if I had my way, this place would be filled with smoke. You know, I mean, like, people's allergies would be going off, you know?
Yeah. I don't know, maybe we should get you like an incense censer and
right. No, we'd be
try it one service.
There's a giant one. There's a giant one at a church in Italy that takes 8 people to swing. Like that's what I want. You know, like you know, they have to tug a giant rope from back there to swing it. And yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to keep that in mind when we
redesign the
space.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When we're redesigning the ceiling, that's absolutely. So anyway,
you're on record. So
right, I would lose that battle, but that's why incense is important. You know, is to remind you. It's your sense of smell. It's your sense of seeing. It's you know, it's bowing. It's your sense of presence in the room. You know.
So is that why?
That's why crossing yourself is important. It's to remind these physical reminders remind you that you are a physical being, not just this ball of goop, that God put here, but, true and living being in a body.
The bags of water line again.
Right, yeah, right.
But is that why cathedrals, especially medieval Gothic cathedrals, were so ornate and art was so important to remind us of that visual element?
Yeah, I mean, part of it's that visual element. Part of it's that a lot of people couldn't read, so like that's how they told the story, right? Was through visual, right? Literacy is not very high in the medieval world.
Yeah.
So you tell the story visually, so all the cathedral doors are, carved with this intricate carving of Christ at Judgment Day, before you enter. And you've got the stained glass, the stories, and the space itself reminds you of the sheer awe of it all, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So there's a lot of symbology there. I think, we tend to forget that, especially in the States where you just have like warehouses.
Yeah, well, they're even shaped like crosses, right? They're in cruciform pattern, so yes.
It's all there. Wow.
Hey guys, we got a jump-in question from the
go for it.
home audience. Steve wants to know, did the apostles see themselves as servants before Jesus said they were his friends? Could they be both?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure they saw themselves as servants / disciples, which kind of in their heads probably means like, they still kind of think Jesus is a revolutionary, right? Like, so they kind of think of themselves as, we're the inner camp of the revolutionary leader, and we're going to be in the government, when the kingdom is restored. Is kind of how they think about it. Pretty much right up until Ascension Day, or Acts is pretty funny. The first question they ask Jesus in Acts chapter 1 is, or Luke, the last chapter, one of the two, is, "Oh Lord, is now when you'll restore the kingdom?" And it's like, you could hear Jesus just be like, "You don't get it yet. You'll get it when the Holy Spirit comes."
So even after the resurrection, that's what they're thinking.
Right, their heads are still kind of there, right?
Yeah.
Is now when you'll restore the kingdom? And Jesus goes, "No."
I'm going to be Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Right, yeah, basically, I'll be, right, Matthew's Chancellor and, Peter's Vice President, and that kind of, that kind of stuff, right? Like,
Wow.
Right. So servants / future inner cabinet positions, if you want to think about it that way, right? I mean, this is why all these people hang on to politicians, right? Similar theory, right? If I volunteer in his campaign and work hard enough and move up through the campaign, I will get
I'll get a position in his government.
Right, or this is usually why you take on a job running a campaign, as I'll be as chief of staff, that kind of, it's a similar principle, so friend alters the relationship, Steve. Yeah.
So that explains why the apostolic mom was pushing for her 2 kids then to.
Yes, why James and John's mother is like, "Oh Lord, let them sit," right. It's all about, let them be vice president and secretary of state, like basically they're jockeying for positions.
So again, all throughout, they're not really getting what it's all
No, they're
about.
not really getting it.
Wow.
They're idiots. They're lovable, but they're a glorious mess, but they're idiots,
Well, is some of that just their youth? Because you've mentioned before they were probably super young.
It's their youth. It's Jesus is asking them to think in a way that's counter programming to everything they've ever heard and everything they're hearing, because I think one of the things to remember is like, you do have the literal revolutionary propaganda like bouncing around at Jesus's day, right? Like there are actual rebels out there, like issuing their propaganda, right? And like Jesus on the one hand is doing this like civil disobedience campaign against Rome, but on the other hand he's also telling his people like, don't even go down the revolutionary track. It's just going to end up in blood and death. Like that's all it's going to end up in.
Yeah.
You've got to do this basically anarchist path forward, and it's pretty hard to wrap your head around when there's so much propaganda. There's Roman propaganda, there's revolutionary propaganda, there's, so Herod's propaganda, like there's so much other thought going around.
Yeah.
I forgive him for not quite getting it, until the Holy Spirit gives him a jolt of lightning to get moving.
And isn't that really the reasoning behind, during Holy Week, Barabbas being the one that's freed?
Right, right.
Because he was that revolutionary that they could wrap their heads around.
Right. It's like, we want the revolutionary, not the guy who said...
Don't revolt.
Right. Or revolt won't get you anywhere, like it'll just end up in the same sad place, So, yeah.
Why did Jesus, one last question on the bread and wine. Why did Jesus wait until after the 12 drank the wine to then tell them it was his blood? There's a sequence in the gospel.
Yeah.
Stuck out.
I don't know why, he's kind of that whole night doing this, do you know what I've done for you kind of thing.
Yeah, all after the fact kind
right.
of deals.
Like he's trying to, the lesson is so hard to learn that you gotta go through it first and then be like, let me interpret this for you, So that's what the whole night is like. And so, it doesn't surprise me that's just, it's probably as much as anything, like, I don't have time for you to argue with me on this. Just do it, and then I'll tell you what you did.
Because if you said beforehand, they would have gone, ew, blood, I'm not drinking
right,
it.
and it's like, I don't have time to convince you anymore. Like, this is done. We're at 0 hour here, so we got to get this done and get moving. So don't argue with me, just do it, and I'll explain it to you later.
Move.
Right.
Yeah. Well, what is it mentions that after all that, and before they went to the garden and all, that they sang a hymn. Do we know what hymn would have been sung?
Nope.
Just
some
a cappella thing, and off they went.
Right.
What is now we're advancing, finally.
Right.
After how many weeks we've done this. So now we're getting to Peter denying Christ 3 times. What's the significance of doing it 3 times? It seems like to make the point, 1 time of denial would have been enough. So why does it have to be 3 times?
Yeah, and the number's a little different in each of the Gospels. I think there's a line in Deuteronomy about a witness who denies at a trial something like 3 times is telling who repeats his testimony is telling the truth or something like that. I seem to recall that line somewhere. So part of it's Peter's trying to be full-throated in his denial.
Like, I really mean it.
Right. Like, part of it's to illustrate to us, like, this wasn't just an accident, right? Like, he had an out, just like all of us do. We have an out, and we don't take it, You're supposed to put yourself in Peter's shoes, and that one of my favorite commentaries on Mark says, we are all Peter in the courtyard, faced with the same dilemma. Like, this is the nature of the Christian life. It's what Mark especially wants you to get, is that the nature of the Christian life is you are Peter out in that courtyard for all time now, and you'll be faced with the same choice. Jesus is on trial, and do you deny him or do you accept it and maybe accept crucifixion, and Mark's trying to, when Mark writes that story and all the other Gospels pick it up, right? Like what they're trying to get across is put yourself there, that's where you are. That's who you are in the story is, Peter.
So short as Mark is, there's still some depth to what he's writing.
I think Mark is actually the deepest of them. His brevity masks sometimes his deepness, but he's got quite a deep story thing going on there, but yeah, he wants you to put yourself in Peter's shoes and, say, you are in this spot now, right? Jesus is on trial. You have a risk at being this whole Christian thing. Will you deny him or will you accept the consequences?
So now Jesus is getting nervous.
Uh-huh.
You know, part of this obviously would be if he knows he's going to be denied, he's got no backup, no support. His posse isn't there for him.
Right, and he's not going to call him in. Right, he didn't. Well, they are at first, right? They want to cut off the guard's ear.
Yeah, well, in Gethsemane.
Yeah, right.
What's the importance of Gethsemane? Why did he pick that? Was that a popular spot to go
I
pray?
have no idea what that garden is. I just don't know. I'm sure, but you know. Anyway, back to support. You know, they wanted to support, right? They were ready to, but Jesus tells them no, and then they all run away.
Yeah, including the kid with no clothes.
Yeah, we don't know much about. That's one of those. My biblical professor said he thinks that's actually Mark in the story. It doesn't say a name, but he actually thinks that's
Mark kind of included himself.
Yeah, that's Mark. That was actually Mark. But you know, Gospels have very weird details in them, right? So who knows?
Yeah, I mean, you figure it must have meant something to Mark to include it. So.
Right.
This gets back to the whole concept of Jesus as God and human simultaneously. Mm-hmm. But since he knew what was going on, either by his own planning or by godly precognition, take your choice, it still seems weird that he gets so distressed and agitated, even to the point of sweating blood. Which is a scientific thing, you know. When you get so extremely agitated, you can hemorrhage in your, and so you sweat blood.
I mean, you got to think about it as this is a little bit weird to think about, but this is the course God the Father has set. Mm-hmm. And Christ willingly obeys. You know, Jesus is fully human, but you got to understand the fullness of his humanity is that he is the full and perfect human. You know, he is what Adam should have been. You know, and so Paul makes this thing where, you know, Jesus willingly submits, whereas Adam refuses to. You know, and so. Like, you know, it's not just that Jesus knows, but it's this part of the reason this whole thing works is Jesus willingly does this, you know, of his own, you know, he says it in John all the time, right? Nobody takes my life from me, I lay it down of my own accord, right? So like there is the option, there's the possibility, right, you know, that he doesn't do it, you know, and so, even if he knows the ending, right, it still sucks.
Yeah.
You know, like.
In some ways makes it worse.
Right. Some ways, right, makes it worse, right? You know, and despite all the fun pictures of, you know, the harrowing of hell, right, I sometimes think we forget, like, you know, hell is involved in this business too, right? Even if you're doing a divine SWAT team rescue mission, you know, it still kind of sucks to go there.
Yeah.
Right? You know? So, like, nothing about this is fun, you know? And so Jesus' plea is, if we could figure out another way, can we please use option B?
Yeah.
You know, and he doesn't get an answer to that prayer, right? Because there is no other way. But, you know, he says, if there could be an option B here, I'd like to take door number 2, you know, kind of thing.
So is that why, you know, he goes from that extreme agitation, that extreme anxiety, to then just kind of complacently going along, not really defending himself, you know, at his trials. Yeah. He just kind of stands there and lets the crowd say what they say, and people assume what they want to assume. Yeah,
I mean, his point at that point is like, you don't really have, you know, whatever power here is from beyond you. Yeah. You know.
Well, it almost sounds like too a kind of a resignation. It's when I visualize, like especially overnight with the Pharisees. Yeah. And just the fact that obviously it was important because Jerusalem seems to be open 24 hours for this.
I know, right? Yeah, for the whole proceeding, right?
But you get the impression that he's not standing there strong, that there's a resignation to him.
There is. The Gospels do this interesting thing where he is both. It is clear he is in control, of the proceedings, right? In a way that a prisoner normally isn't, right? He's the one often asking questions. By the end with Pilate, he's the one asking questions, and Pilate is giving the answers.
Yeah.
Pilate actually seats Jesus, it says, on the judgment throne. That's actually, but he's in purple robed in a crown on the judgment throne, right? Like, Pilate's trying to mock him, but even when he's mocking him, he's proclaiming who Jesus really is, right? Like, he is the king, he in purple robe and crown and on the throne.
Yeah.
So, like, even, he mockingly says, here is your king, right? But he's still declaring, like, Pilate, these people can't help in this moment but declare what Jesus really is, even though they are trying to make fun of him, right? So there's this thing about how Jesus is truly in control of this, and yet in control means I surrender to it, to this process that is happening. Yeah. You guys need to just interrupt.
Okay, so Steve has another question. Was it really bad that Peter denied Jesus? Peter went on to save how many people and even founded the church?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no, right? Jesus chooses him fully aware of who he is, right? Right. And I wouldn't think of it as like the good we do makes up for the bad. That's always kind of that math equation gets you into a bad place, spiritually speaking. I would think about it as, these are the 12, right? Jesus said it in this one, right? Like, I chose you, right? And so, that statement it's not like he's like, I chose you. Oh, crap, I didn't know about this denial thing. Like, man, we're stuck now, but Jesus,
Yeah, why isn't that on your resume?
Right,
seriously.
Right. I would say it's more, I chose you knowing this is who you are, There's also this quite painful moment after the resurrection where Jesus asked Peter 3 times, do you love me?
Yeah, again, the 3 times.
Right,
Yeah.
and it's like, that's almost a undoing of the, it's meant to be this kind of mirror.
Each one has to cancel the denial.
Right, and, but the end of that is Jesus giving him a death prediction, right? Jesus says, okay, you're now in for it, in for a penny, in for a pound now, and they're going to take you and kill you. Just so you know.
FYI.
Right. Now that you're committed, kind of thing.
Yeah. Which kind of gets back to the point you've made several times that Christianity is supposed to, an inherent part of it is suffering.
And suffering and death, right?
Yeah.
You're going to suffer, you're going to die. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Man. And that brings us right up to the end of our time for today. But I think one more week and we'll be able to finish this off.
Yeah, we moved through pretty fast that one, actually.
Yeah, we got through. We're at least at the trial point now.
Yeah.
So. Cool. So we'll do that next week. Plenty of time to come up with your questions. And you can always email them. People have done that too.
Yep.
So we'll be ready.
All right.
Thank you again.
Thank you.